Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's CAEP Data Dive Part 1 webinar hosted by Jay Wright from CASAS. My name is Liberty Van Natten, and I'm the project specialist for the California Adult Education Program Technical Assistance Project. Before we begin today's webinar, I'm going to go over just some general housekeeping. So during the webinar, if you have general questions, please post them in the general chat box at the bottom right of the screen. The presenters will answer these questions at their first opportunity. If you need technical assistance, please put a note in the chat box and someone will reach out to you. Melinda just put a chat. Thank you, Melinda. If you have logged in using your initials, your consortium name, your school site, or an acronym, if you could please identify who you are in the chat pod, that would be great. And if you have other people who are participating in the webinar with you and you've logged on with one device, could you also let us know how many people you have with you in the chat pod? This will help us to get a more accurate count of attendees today. And just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. The recording, the presentation slides, and any other resources will be available for download on the California Adult Education Program website. And as always, if there is a need for technical assistance or professional development, please contact TAP. Thank you. And without further ado, Jay, let's get started.
Probably a lot of you have been to these. We did a couple of these in late February. We did a makeup session on March 13th because the one we did in February ran a little bit over. I got a little long-winded, so we're doing this again. What I'll just say in reference to the long-windedness from late February, there's a quantitative data deep dive we did. About half of it related to agency-level data diving, half of it related to consortium-level data diving. So what we decided to do is do two different webinars, one today and one Wednesday, same time. The one we do today is going to focus on the agency-level examples. Then we'll do a repeat Wednesday at noon and focus on the consortium-level examples, knowing that when we try to bite off more than we can chew and do it all at the same time, we never quite get it done in a timely fashion, so we're splitting it in half. So I'll just say, does that make sense to all of you? Is that what you were expecting? If it's not what you were expecting, does it at least sound reasonable to everybody? Okay, that's your story and you're sticking to it. And we've gone from 75 to 80 since I came on, so that's good. That means we didn't have everybody bail just because of my difficulty and my lack of courtesy in not letting you hear me when we started. So great. So we talk a little bit about qualitative, quantitative. We'll review the reports a little bit. I know a lot of you were in these other webinars. For about half of you that were in a couple weeks ago or in February, this is going to sound like a broken record, but I did want to spend 10 minutes or so kind of getting it all set up. Then we'll get into what some of the drill down features and consortium level reports are. I will read off the examples at both the agency and consortium level, but like I said, I will get into the agency level examples in detail today. Then on Wednesday, I'll skip those and focus more on the consortium level examples when we meet back up on Wednesday. So yes, it sounds a little cheap on my part, I guess. But yeah, you need to do the one today and on Wednesday to get the whole kit and caboodle with this entire agenda. And I'll just say, yeah, biting off this whole agenda in one sitting tends to be just a little too much. Anyway, so we'll move on from here. I think this should be what everybody knows already. This is where you find the AEP reports in TE. This is definitely review, the state reports menu. We've got a bunch of these AEP reports located in the same location in TE. And then this says it's from the February 20th webinar. That was the first of that two-part series that we did in February. Sorry, I'm making it too much about the previous webinars. But we did webinars on February 20th and February 27th. I'll say the titles I gave these webinars were very poorly done on my part and very confusing. So I'll just say the best I've been able to do here is I've called one of them the quote-unquote qualitative webinar, and then the other one, which is what we're doing today, is the quote-unquote quantitative webinar. So again, the qualitative one is what we have scheduled for April 8th. That quantitative one is the one that includes the agency level examples and consortium level examples that we're dividing in half and doing both today and Wednesday of this week. But overall, in that qualitative webinar, and we'll get back to it again in early April, and this is also from a couple webinars that people like Neil Kelly have done here over the last month or so. They've been asking these really basic questions about our AEP data. Making a long story short, we've got the statewide level data rolled up and complete now from the 17-18 year. So state level people like Neil have started to look at it and started to think about important questions from a state level perspective that we should be asking, good questions to ask at the state level, good questions to ask at the consortium and agency levels as well. So here are said questions. This is not the whole webinar, but we will be focusing on these issues throughout this webinar. Obviously, in this webinar, we'll look at this from the agency perspective. We'll be revisiting these same questions on Wednesday and obviously be looking at these same questions from the consortium level perspective. So first off, we're going to go from basic to a little bit more advanced. So for starters, looking at the students with any activity in AEP period, whether they're in a class, service, whatever, if they're tied to AEP in any way, shape, or form, what percentage of those stuck around long enough to at least get enrolled? So that is, of any who made contact with you at all, how many got at least 1 hour of instruction and at least got that initial program enrollment in one of those 7 AEP programs? Then the second question is, of those with program enrollment, that is, who got at least 1 hour of instruction, how many stuck around long enough to get at least 12 hours of instruction? Then taking it yet another step further, of those who got 12 hours of instruction, how many, were around long enough or excelled enough to actually achieve at least one official AEP outcome? Then yet another way to look at it is more through testing, and in that qualitative webinar, this is what we really highlighted, because from an NRS WIOA point of view, this is the way we look at it pretty much exclusively on that side of the fence. Of those who have the 12 or more hours of instruction, how many stuck around long enough to get both a pre-test and a post-test? So what I would say is these are 4 different ways of looking at a concept that we would call persistence. So what I like to reference here is there is a report in TE called the Persista report. It's an NRS report, so I won't get into it too much now, but it's basically just a simple report that shows what percentage of students at each level had a pre-test and a post-test. So from an NRS or WIOA 2 point of view, when we use the term persistence, we're really looking at it in terms of testing. We're looking at it in terms of whether students stick around long enough, but the measuring stick is always, did they get a pre and post test? So we're suggesting that's definitely one really good way to measure it for AEP as well. But given that AEP covers the WIOA 2 programs, but it also covers non-WIOA 2 programs such as Career Tech Ed, we know that looking at it exclusively in terms of testing is not going to cut the mustard. We need to look at it in terms of testing as well as other ways. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, count them, 4 different methods we're using to look at that basic concept of learner performance and learner persistence. So I'm just going to pause. I just said a gigantic mouthful. Does everybody follow me? We had technical difficulty. I jumped in and just started babbling. Now I'm throwing all this on you. Is everybody hanging in here? Is it all making sense? Or did I just stir up a world of confusion already? Okay, everybody's saying yes. Thank you for being so cooperative. Thank you very much. We'll move along. So again, we're looking at this as ways of measuring our performance. We're also looking at it as measuring our persistence. Like I said, we'll get into the basics of how we might make general conclusions on this in that April 8th webinar. That's the qualitative one where we'll be making some qualitative suggestions on different issues at both the student level and agency level where you might improve. Again, this quantitative webinar, though, we're sticking more with TE data, but I'll just point out at the end of the day, you can use these reports to make broad conclusions about your data. Are there a million different things that go into it that make it an overgeneralized confusion, Freudian slip, a generalized conclusion, I should say? Absolutely. It's a very overgeneralized conclusion. You might say bordering on confusion, as my Freudian slip suggests. But in any case, you can make those general conclusions about whether your performance is good or bad, and then at the same time, is your persistence good or bad? In that webinar we did on February 20th, we made the simple conclusion that we can then characterize our agency data in these 4 broad ways. We've just got this basic XY axis. On the x-axis, we have agency performance. On the y-axis, we have agency persistence. Obviously, 4 different ways where we can be good in both. We can be bad in both. And then the 2 different ways where we might be good in one and not so good in the other. So what we were talking about mostly were really these, were the ones that were, I would say, on the left-hand side here. The one in red where we're low in both. The one in tan in the upper left where we're low performance, high persistence. Those are where our focus really goes in. If we look at the black and we're high in both, well, then we don't have a problem. We can call it Miller time and congratulate ourselves. I'll just say if we're in this lower right, we can't do that. But we're in a very, 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 very unusual situation if we somehow have good performance without having correspondingly okay or good persistence. It's really hard to perform well without persistence being average or better. So we look on the left-hand side and look at the low in both, or when we have low performance or high persistence, that's where the focus is. Again, we'll get into the laundry listing of that and explain that more on April 8th, but we'll pick up where we left off on the data here. Before we dig into the examples, just a quick overview. We have the AEP summary. Are we all feeling like we're familiar with this AEP summary, yes or no? If you're not, don't feel shy. How are we feeling about this? Everybody's saying we're pretty familiar with it. So that's good. We're already familiar. Again, I like to say 3 sections, left hand, middle, right hand. You know, again, or if you prefer high bar to the left, medium bar to the middle, and low bar to the right, meaning literacy gains to the left. That's where we're looking at our pre-post. That's our high bar. That's where we use federal rules. We require demographics. We require pre-post testing. We require 12 hours of instruction. Then the middle bar are all the outcomes, transition, employment, etc. All of those outcomes that we're tracking that don't involve pre and post testing. So that middle section requires 12 hours and requires demographics, but it does not require any testing. And then that low bar to the right, that's that services section. So you don't need to have anything related to testing. You don't need to have anything related to demographics. You don't need the 12 hours either. You don't even need class or program enrollment. As long as you've got an ID and a service, you get into that section. So we have 3 sections with 3 completely different sets of criteria that get the students into these different buckets. So yet again, I'm going to pause. Sorry, you're getting really tired of it. We've got 90 people, so I'm playing with matches, asking you all these questions, and we have 90 people. But is everybody following me there? Is that good enough there on the AP summary? Okay, I'm kind of leading you to water with these questions, I realize, but everybody's saying you're good to go, so I'm going to take your word for it. So we also have the AP data integrity, obviously another one that you should be using. I'm sure it's one that you guys all know. I've been talking a little bit more about that one here lately, but again, we've got the AP DIR. You know, the key is what's going on at the top. That's what I like to focus on most. Here's the long-winded explanation. But again, what we're basically doing is taking that wide net at the beginning. We're basically trying to collect all the students who have any relationship to AP period. So the way we do that is go to the services section, because that's the low bar. That's where we have the biggest number of students. So we start with services and kind of work our way backward. But that first step, you've heard me give this goofy analogy, a lot of you, is on that first step, we like to cast that really wide fishing net. At the beginning, we don't care that we get kelp and we get logs and we get a few license plates and tin cans and so on. So be it. The goal at the beginning is to get all the fish in the sea. If we get a lot of clutter with it, that's no problem, because we're just trying to get all the fish. Once we get all the fish, we can then work our way backwards till we have the number that's convenient enough to serve as that denominator for all 27 items on the report. So what we're doing is we're casting the wide net by looking at the students in the services section, and then we're winnowing it down, to use another fishing term, to get to where we only have those students with enrollment in those 7 AP programs. By definition, the official AP students are only those ones that have enrollment in one of those 7 AP programs. That's just because the legislature says so. So what we're doing at the top is we're weeding it down so we have that consistent denominator. So we're getting it to only those with program enrollment. What you can see with those 6 indented rows is TE is really just stopping to smell the coffee here, whereas we're weeding out some of these students, TE is pointing out some that we're eliminating that seem to have some useful fruit along the way. Hey, we're weeding out these students, but hey, we're weeding out students that actually got jobs. We're weeding out students that actually earned their diploma, et cetera, et cetera. So they're getting weeded out no matter, but it's pointing some of these out to our attention that we may want to provide extra focus to say, yeah, if they've got their diploma, they've got their GED, they've got a pay increase or whatever, we may want to put more effort to make sure we get them enrolled because they're yielding these outcomes that we really want to track in our data. So at the end of the day, we're weeding out all the ones that don't have enrollment. We're weeding out concurrence and so on. At the bottom of this section, we get this one uniform number that we can use to serve as the denominator for the entire report. Bottom line is if we don't have a consistent denominator, the report just won't work, period. Okay, so moving along here, before I jump into the examples, I also wanted to touch a little on the AP program hours. This is just another resource at your disposal that you might use. This is what we put in primarily for that AP fire drill we had roughly a month ago, where you remember that about a month ago, we had that data that everybody had to report in NOVA. I believe it was due February 15th. So you had to run hours by program. We put in a TE report that you could use and basically just copycat this report to meet that requirement. We did make a lot of changes to this report right before that February 15th deadline. I don't want to get into all the gory details here, but what I do want to say is we did make changes. The long story short is the brunt of those changes had to do with unduplicating some of the hours. In particular, where some of you saw duplication is if you have class instance records in TE that were designated for more than one program. So a canned example that I've recommended many times, so to be clear, it's nothing wrong with doing this. In fact, there's a few examples that I've even recommended. One of them is if you're doing integrated education and training, ILCE, we've suggested that you might have classes that are simultaneously marked for both ESL and Career Tech Ed, that is that integrated education and training. So if you're marking it that way, it's not a problem at all. You're doing the right thing. But for this purpose, those types of classes with more than one program cause duplication issues. So we had to reprogram this report to unduplicate that. So in my example, the way we had it prior to the 1st of February is it would give you an inflated, unduplicated count, where if you had hours in a class that you marked for ESL and CTE, TE would assign all those hours to CTE and assign all those hours to ESL. Obviously, that was 125% wrong. It was an inflated, duplicated count. So we had to unduplicate it and program it to where it would split those hours between CTE and ESL in that example. To be clear, the way we have it right now is still not 125% correct because we had to program it one specific way for all classes. That one specific way, our command decision was just to make it 50-50 in all instances. So in that example, TE automatically gives 50% to ESL and 50% to TE. I say we know that's not always right because in some instances it might be some split other than 50-50. Just know for now you're going to have it split 50-50 whether you like it or not. For now, we've worked with the AP office. We all agree that the way we have it is fine for now. If this proves to be something we need to do every year, we'll definitely need to do more programming to get to even more granularity. If this was just a one-shot deal, we feel like the way we have it is totally A-okay, but just a little bit of a sidestep because that's been a big deal here for the last month and a half or so. So I'll give that one a mercy killing. Here's just some more information where I just wanted to show you that this report, like all others, you can do right-clicking and drill down just like you know with these other reports. I'm going to stop here. Again, another really long-winded discussion here, but everybody's still with me. I'm going to ask that again. Did I lose you, yes or no? If I did, don't feel shy. Let me know that that was way too much of a bird walk and you're snoozing on me already. Multiple attendees are typing. Okay, so you're going out of your way to say not snoozing. Wonderful. All right, thank you. All right, everybody's going out of their way. All right, thank you. All right, so moving to the next slide. This is one that most of you have seen before. This is just the basic on drill down. I'm pretty sure you guys all know this, but you're all aware of the basics that with these AP reports, not to mention all the reports in TE, one of the big advertised features is the drill down. That is, you generate reports and you can double click those cells that have numbers in them to drill down to a lister that gives you, the information included in that cell. So in this screenshot, you can see we have the AP report to the left that shows that we have 102 learners in our ESL program. If we just double click that 102, you can see the screenshot to the right. Not so coincidentally, that generates a lister of exactly 102 students. That's what we've been advertising in TE for some 6 or 7 years now. I think you're all familiar with this feature. This is just to demonstrate. What we've also been advertising and talking about for a while, what I've said since 2011, 2012 is drill down is great. Right-clicking is even better, meaning you can drill down on those TE reports. In addition, you can also right-click on those same cells. Usually right-clicking is even better. Where drilling down, you've got one way to double-click and get that lister to find out more information about that cell. If you right-click, you have an option of several listers and reports in most situations, so you can drill down and get that information. And in addition, you have choice on these AP reports specifically. Generally, any cell on most of these reports, you get a choice of 6 different listers and 6 different reports with every single cell on every single report. Okay. No, so for CTE, I see your question, Annabelle. In CTE, if you test those students, you can still get literacy gains and it will still show up under CTE. If you're talking about reporting for NRF, then obviously those CTE students are all going to be eliminated. But for AP, if you happen to be pre- and post-testing them, yes, they can get literacy gains like everybody else. To be clear, I think you know this already, but just to be clear, make sure the question's clear. you're not required to test in CTE. So as you know, for ABE ESL students, you definitely should pre and post. If you decide, you know what, it's not really worth time to test in CTE, that's fine, it's not required. But if you happen to test in CTE, number one, it will be recorded. Number two, it will go under CTE to give them credit. Okay, so before I answer this follow-up, Annabelle, are you talking about AP program hours? Are you trying to revisit that question from that AP program hours slide? Or are you just talking generally about whether they show up on the summary? Okay, I'm going to wait a minute to see if you answer quickly. If not, I'll move on and get double back, I guess. Okay, but I'll just say for here, you can right-click and choose. Okay, so just generally then, okay, so you're not talking about AP program hours. Then, yeah, workforce reentry is the same as CTE. Like CTE, you're definitely not required to do any testing for them either. But if you've decided to do so, if they happen to have that pair, then it will definitely get recorded and credited to reentry, just like it will CTE. Again, not required, but if you happen to do it, it will be recorded for that specific program, even though it's not required. It will show that you tested in that non-required program. It'll get counted the exact same way. So what for payment points, that's where I think that's what generated your question. Payment points has nothing to do with AP. That's on the WIOA2 side. And on that side, that's only ABE, ASE, ESL. All of that reentry and CTE and that stuff will definitely be automatically disqualified from payment points. Okay, so looking at the next, so here's the general right-click option. So for listers, here's the set of listers you'll get in pretty much any AP report. So for starters, you have that in-program years lister. That's that student program year. You can see that's the one that appears at the top of the screenshot. That by default, by the way, is also the one you're going to get as the default option for the regular double click. You know, the regular drill down without re-clicking. The default is always in-program years. The reason why in-program years is always the default is that's the one lister we can always generate where we can be guaranteed that the item count in the lister you generate exactly equals the item count in that report or the number you're clicking. In the early days of TE, it was very clear if those item counts don't match, it becomes very confusing to most TE users. So we default to in-program years to make sure those item counts always match. So if your intent is just to get a general ID of everybody who's in that cell, the in-program years lister is the best thing to generate. Then student population, that's the demographics lister. So if your suspicion is you're looking at a report, the number seems a little low, maybe it's the enrollee count is low, maybe it's the outcomes are low, whatever it is. If it's low and your suspicion is you might have lost some students because of missing gender, missing race and ethnicity, date of birth, whatever, the suggestion here would be to right-click and drill down to student population. That would take you straight to that lister that includes all those demographics fields. You can verify whether the demographics are there or not. You can then quickly and easily correct any mistakes in the demographics area in that demographics lister. Okay, so Nina and Francisco are having a discussion. I'll leave that with you guys for now. Sounds like you're doing pretty well with your own discussion on that. Okay, so next one is...
Brenda Flores had a question. She wants to know if she double-clicks, does it give the student program year population anyway? Or...
Right, if you double-click, that will be the in-program
Okay, got it, thanks.
Okay, yes, yes. Anyway, so student program population, that gives you the program enrollment. That is, which of those 7 programs are they enrolled in? So using the same example, you see this item count. Well, on the screenshot, the 375 ESL learners, if you know that number is low and your suspicion is that it's low because you didn't get enough students officially enrolled in a program and or a class, you might want to right-click to that student program population. that will right-click directly to that lister that gives you the program enrollment for each student. That's a way where you can A, verify everybody's enrollment, and B, quickly and easily, make fixes to program enrollments if you need to. Then the final option on this slide is student record population. That corresponds to records, student records on the TE menu. That is the student records lister. That's the lister that includes all those various outcomes. So if you're looking at this report and you know the item count is low and your suspicion is the item count is low, you feel like your hours is fine, your demographics is fine, everything's clean, but maybe you just haven't recorded enough outcomes, you can go to records, student records. That's where all those outcomes are located, and you can see in the lister, verify whether you have or have not recorded outcomes. If not, that's a way to quickly and easily make those changes or additions to your data. So again, big mouthful. I digressed a couple times for questions. So everybody's still with me after this explanation, yes or no? All right, great, thank you, thank you. So here are the reports. So again, just like you can get all those listers with any right-click option, you can also get the reports. So I'm just going to do the same thing I did for the listers. So the NRS monitor, that's what I would call the everything you wanted to know and more report. It's all things related to federal reporting, so that's where the and more is. It gives you all things you need to know: program enrollment, pre and post testing, hours of instruction, anything related to NRS qualification. It also gives you information on things like POPs and some of the federal rules that you may or may not need, so everything you need to know and more. But you might say, if you look at one of these numbers and you know it's low, but you really have no earthly idea why, you might want to consider right-clicking and going to the NRS monitor to get all of that information about every single student, so you can get more information to better figure out maybe why that number is low or what it is specifically you need to fix. So again, if you know the number's low but you don't know why, that would be one option. Then the next two, we have the outcomes monitor and services monitor. That's just to get greater granularity. When you look at that summary, in terms of outcomes, you never get the detailed outcome, you just get the category. So for example, in employment, it will show you the total number that earned employment outcomes. But if you want that greater granularity, that is, you want to specify whether they got a job, retained a job, or entered military, you need to right-click and look at the outcomes monitor if you want to go blow by blow. Similar with services, you can see the category of services on the AP summary, but if you want to specifically find out which service goes to which student, you need to get the services monitor to get that level of detail. Assessments audit would be another detail-oriented issue. Obviously, that's with pre- and post-testing. If you're looking at literacy gains and you see low numbers, you might want to check the assessments audit. That's where you can thoroughly reconcile what you've done with pre- and post-testing. I always say use that with caution. A lot of people would say the level of detail in that one might be more than you bargained for, but it definitely gives you everything you'd ever want to know about pre and post. Then another way to kind of check out everything is you can right-click and view the DIR. So first off, if you run the DIR directly from the TE menu, by necessity, obviously you're going to get the DIR for your entire agency. Sometimes you might want to look at the DIR for a specific population. So in this example, you could right-click that 375 and go to DIR. And in this case, it would generate the DIR for just those 375 students in ESL. That way you could be clear that those that were missing demographics or missing hours or pre and post or whatever were only students in ESL, and thereby you weren't bogged down or overly cluttered with some of those students that weren't part of that 375. Then a new right-click option that we added for AP program hours, we have this option called Students in Multiple Programs. So back to that AP program hours, if you have students that might be duplicated either on the summary or in program hours. In most cases, that's probably going to be an on purpose. But if you see that there's a lot of duplication and you really don't understand why, if your intent was to avoid that kind of duplication, you can right-click and go to Students and Multiple Programs and clearly see by student and by program which programs and which students represented all of that duplication, and thereby might be inflating your count and might be confusing the issue, locally for you. Okay? So I'll just pause yet again. Everybody still with me? All right, sorry I'm asking that, but good, good, good. And so again, we've got two additional options. These are two lister options that are in the DIR but are not on the summary. We've got class record. This has to do with hours. The same thing as what we talked about with some of those other options. You view a number on the DIR or on the summary. The number, the number's low. In this case, your suspicion is you think you might be getting people dropped because of that 12 hours of instruction issue. You might want to right-click and select Student Class Record. Thereby, you can generate that lister that includes instructional hours. Thereby, you can quickly and easily make fixes to students that might have that issue. And then we have student assessment. That allows you to go to the test lister. So if you've got issues with pre- and post-testing, that might be a good way to fix those kind of issues. Okay, and so moving along, I'm going to gloss over this and get more into this here on Wednesday, but we also have consortium reports. Again, I want to cover this more on Wednesday. But we have those three different ones. We've got the demographic summary. You can see that gives you all that information on all the demographics. We've got the AEP summary. That's a little less nifty, but it gives you a different report for every agency in your consortium. You also can do the same thing with barriers to employment. Again, a separate page for each agency in your consortium. All kinds of nifty things you can do with these consortium level reports. There's a way where you can also aggregate it. You can run it to where you get separate pages for each agency, or you can click that aggregate multiple agencies and get a single view for all agencies and get an aggregated number. We'll get more into consortium level reports on Wednesday, but I'll type that in. That's certainly a question we can deal with now, Karen, but you just want to go ahead and send an email to cape@casas.org, CAEP. Again, what you want to do is identify yourself by name. Please be sure to give the name of your consortium in that email, because sometimes we've given out that consortium level login already. If we've given it out already, it doesn't mean you can't have it, but it does mean we'll redirect you to that person that we've given it to already rather than create a second one. So if somebody's done that, we'll redirect you to that person. If nobody's done that yet, then we'll definitely create that new login for you. But again, cape@casas.org is where you can initiate that. Okay, so here's our agency level. Here are our agency level examples. Again, we've got 8 different examples. So what we were talking about, well, I've got to say the drill down we kind of made intentional. I've got to say, I see why it would be convenient, but I've got to say we had that discussion and it was not just overruled, but pretty much obliviated by FERPA. We did think of it, but I've got to say rather resoundingly, we decided against giving any drill down at the consortium level. Got to say the issues with FERPA make that a really, 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 really bad idea. We don't want anybody at Riverside Adult being able to drill down to Riverside Community College and vice versa. All kinds of FERPA problems with that. You've got to have okay, I see you're changing that a little bit without having drill down. I see. So you just want that to be one of the consortium. Sorry. I thought it was RIF. Sorry. Sorry, I read. Okay, so everybody's saying yes. Sorry, I read that wrong. All right, well, send me an email. We can put it on the wish list. I'm not going to say any. I'll say send an email, and I'll pass that along without prejudice. I'm not sure how easy or hard that is, but I understand that would definitely be popular. Anyway, agency level. So we're going to look at the agency level examples here today. We'll look at the consortium level examples here on Wednesday. So here are our agency level examples. So for starters, I just want to do a real basic DIR drill down. Then we'll do a basic AAP summary drill down. Then I want to do maybe not an advanced level, but an intermediate level drill down on the DIR. And then starting with example 4, I'll double back to those questions we were asking in those previous webinars in February, getting into those, that we're kind of piggybacking on those questions that Javier and Neil were asking in some of those state level presentations prior to that, where we'll be looking at some of those performance and persistence variables from an AP program enrollment point of view, and then we'll be kind of building up to those examples that relate more to pre and post testing, kind of starting with the real easy example and then working our way up to a slightly higher level of complexity each step of the way. So I'll just make sure everybody's still with me. I know you're getting tired of me asking that, but I'm starting to jump into an example here, so it does make sense. Hopefully, Jody and Francisco, hopefully you got my answer eventually, even though I kind of started down the wrong track with your question. Okay, everybody's saying you're hanging in there. Thank you very much. Okay, you got it. Thank you very much. Okay. So here's the first example. Again, we've got a screenshot from the DIR. Again, we're staying super basic here, I think. But our idea here is we're just looking at a basic DIR example. We're just taking the most obvious example here where we've got a number where it seems like the number of students missing an important item is high, especially when looking at our total number of enrollees. So in this example, we're just saying we're looking at labor force status. You can see the number missing labor force status is almost as high as the number reported, obviously. Not the biggest problem in the world, but our data obviously looking not good at all there. How do we fix this problem? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to right-click. So we're looking at item 6E. That is, we're focusing, and you can see we magically changed the numbers here, but show it just to show you how it works. So we're right-clicking on that number in item 6E, the total missing labor force status. You see that gives us that nice big laundry list of options. And in this particular example, we're going to right-click to student record population. Again, that's that option that corresponds to records, students' records on the TE menu. That is the student records lister. Okay, and student records lister. We're simply suggesting this is the correct answer in this example because this happens to be the lister that includes labor force status. So our option is to right-click to the lister that includes the field we need to double-check on. That would be labor force status. As you can see, by right-clicking to that lister, that's where labor force status is. So proof in the pudding number 1, there's that column of labor force status right there. Proof in the pudding number 2, all of the listings under this lister are blank in that labor force status column. So that obviously is a good hint that we need to improve that area. So here's where we can easily go to each student record and quickly and easily, edit labor force status either in a batch or one by one, depending on how our students are fixed for labor force status. So I think that's pretty much easy, no muss, no fuss. Everybody understand example number 1? All right, everybody seems to be okay there, all right, so we'll move to example number 2. So we start with a basic DIR example. Here's a basic example for the AP summary. So in this example, you can see the number of outcomes is simply lower than expected, about the most basic AP summary example you're going to get. I will just add, you can see that I was a little bit creative with my screenshot making here. I manipulated this screenshot to show column E, I, and J together. Obviously, it's not going to look this way on the report, but we're basically just changing the screenshot so it's real easy to see that these numbers are low. What I was really trying to do is just show in a vacuum, 18 get a job and 5 increase wages, really not that bad, but it is kind of shaky when compared to 430 enrollees in that program. That's why we're pointing it out as a potential low number. So we're just saying we've made our list and checked it twice. We know we're kind of thin in that area when it comes to getting jobs for CTE. We would have thought our CTE program would have done better. So in this example, you can see we can right-click the numbers in all 3 of these columns. You know, we might want to take a look and right-click our total number of enrollees in Career Tech Ed. We might want to right-click and take a look at these 18 who got a job. We might want to right-click and take a look at these 5 who achieved increased wages. We're probably going to want to look at all 3 of those. You know, we may not necessarily need to go crazy with all 3 lists, but we are going to want to do a general compare and contrast with those 3 lists most likely. So we're right-clicking on column E, column I, and column J. You know, we're going to compare these reports to kind of see how many might be missing demographics, how many might have less than 12 hours, and so on. So one thing we can do is just generally take a look at those. If our suspicion is hours, we might want to right-click and look at that class records and verify hours. If our suspicion is demographics, we might want to right-click on that student program and basically look at the demographics to verify that. For this example, though, we're going to take a slightly more advanced viewpoint and say that we've done that already and we know our hours of instruction, you know, has been at least initially checked on, and same for demographics. So we're going to do a more detailed look, and we're going to right-click to the DIR. So we're generating the DIR with just the 430, just the 18, and just the 5. We're creating 3 kind of subset DIRs. It sounds like a lot, but it's literally just 5 or 10 seconds of right-clicking and generating depending on the size of your database. And so we're going to generate that, and where the suggestion is here is we're looking at the higher numbers on the DIR. That is, here's the screenshot. We're kind of using example number 3, moving into example number 3 here, where these higher numbers, that is number 23 to 27, are the items that really focus more on AEP-specific issues. So 23 to 27 correspond to those different areas of AB 104. That is a couple items on wages, a couple items on employment, a couple areas on transition, and so on. So we've got 23 to 27A and 23 to 27B. So to be clear, 23A through 27A basically show you the total number of students that successfully achieved that AP outcome. So that means they were marked for one of those official AP categories, and based on demographics, hours, et cetera, they're good to go. They successfully earned the outcome. 23B through 27B, again, show you that same area of AB 104, but instead of showing you those that successfully got the outcome, the Bs in this part of the DIR show you those that were marked but did not achieve that outcome. They were dropped because of some drop reason. Maybe it was hours of instruction, maybe it was program enrollment, maybe it was demographics, maybe it was something else, although generally it's going to be one of those 3 things. So for whatever reason, it was eliminated. So for those, you might need to follow up. So what I would say is you could right-click item 23 to 27. In this case, back to the example we were looking at. So in this specific example, we're saying our problem areas are enter employment and increase wages. So in this example, we would want to look at 25A and B and 26A and B. That is, we'd want to look at 25A and B for employment, 26A and B for wages, and compare and contrast. In looking at those areas, what we're basically looking at is if we have high numbers. So if you look at employment, you can see we have a really high number under 25A. So based on that, we're looking pretty good on achieved outcomes. So in that case, we might want to look and see if maybe we've got a lot to achieved, meaning, we don't have that many we really need to fix. So that might demonstrate that our data is pretty clean, but we just didn't mark as many outcomes as we expected. If you look at wages, on the other hand, you can see, you can kind of see the same story, lower numbers all the way around, but only one person has dropped. So again, it looks like in both areas, we're not really getting that many drops. So if our numbers are low, it just means we need to do more scanning, we need to do more importing, we need to do more box checking. We've done a great job with data cleanup, but if we know our numbers are low, then the issue in this example is we just need to be recording more outcomes in this example. Okay, the Social Security number, Francisco, would not be affected by this kind of troubleshooting. For AP reporting, it's good to include Social Security number in the long run because there will be some data matching for this. But as far as the TE reports for AP are concerned, it's really not looking at who does or does not have Social Security number. That won't factor in these item counts at all. What I'll just reiterate is back to those AP accountability sessions. What we are including self-reported data in AP. So Annabelle kind of brought up the WIOA AP difference a little bit earlier. You're bringing up another one. When we're looking at WIOA 2 NRS, we're under federal guidelines. So the fact that the student said so is never acceptable. We need to do that data matching before the feds will ever accept that data. For AP, it's state-level reporting, so the state, like the feds, are interested in data matching and Social Security number, but because it's state-level reporting, we can be a little more flexible than we are with NRS WIOA 2. We're not beholden to federal rules, so at the state level, we'll at least accept that state-reported data. The state's still doing data matching, and we'll still be reporting that in our data, but but in the reports, we'll still accept the fact that the student said so Social Security number not required for any of this. Hopefully that's your question there, Francisco. I think that kind of gets at your question, Stacy, as well. Okay, so again, here's just another example, AB for diploma, high school equivalency. You can see there were almost as many who marked the outcome and did not qualify as those who achieved the outcome. So that's an example where we really need to look more at cleaning up our data, looking at demographics and hours to get that data cleaner. For employment, you can see we have way more that achieve the outcome, a very small percentage that seem to have those kind of problems. So if we know those numbers are low, data cleanup isn't going to really do that much good. We really need to just focus more on marking more update records or doing more importing or whatever. So I've been bird walking and doing a lot of things at once. So once again, I'm going to sanity check myself and make sure, are we all okay here? Is everybody with me? I know I'm going in too many directions here. Okay, so not too many directions, I hope. Thank you. All right, thanks for humoring me. Hopefully you can realize why I keep asking that it's real easy to feel like you're talking to a brick wall here and you're way too off in J-land or whatever. Okay, so let's move on to the next examples. So the next examples after this one focus on the webinar from a month ago and the previous ones that the AP office did. That is those basic state-level questions. So I'll reiterate, but I'll focus more on how they fit into AP reports and TE. So the first one is, of those students with any relationship to AP whatsoever, how many at least had some instructional program enrollment? So to be clear, that's all about column L. We get all of that information from the right-hand section of the summary. That is the total number of enrollees related to short-term services. More on that in a minute. Then the next question, of those who actually stuck around long enough to get program enrollment, who stuck around long enough to get at least get that 1 hour of instruction, of those, how many stuck around long enough to get at least that 12 hours of instruction and, qualify for outcomes and potentially qualify for federal reporting and all that good kind of stuff. So I'll just say how many of those got 12 hours. That's comparing column E for AP outcomes with column L services. Then the third question is, of those who qualified with the 12 or more hours, how many actually achieved outcomes? With that, we're really looking all at the section under column E. And then of those who qualified with at least 12 hours, how many stuck around long enough to achieve a pre-post pair? Of those who got the pair, how many actually achieved level gain? With that, we're looking more in columns B and C. That's in the left-hand section of the AP report. So hopefully it's all making sense from an AP summary point of view here. So let's start with the most basic question where we're just looking at how many have enrollment. So example 4, again, we'll go back to this question. Or I think I might have sorry, this got out of order. I'm really sorry about that. I don't know how that slipped in. So anyway, you can see how this is out of order. Sorry about that. But anyway, I'll go back here for the question. That's what I was really looking for, is again, of those with activity, how many enrolled in a program. So, again, we're looking at AP program enrollment. We're looking at column L on the AP summary. So we're comparing those numbers across column L. That is that enrollee or shaded column in the right-hand part of the AP summary. Specifically, what we need to do here is we're comparing that number under no designated program to the total unduplicated students. So first off, we talked earlier about the general logic of the AP summary, and we talked about that right-handed section for services as being the one that covers everybody. That is that wide net that basically captures every single student regardless of how much activity they have. You might say we got 10,000 students by casting that wide net. Of those that we captured, 8,000 of those, are those, unduplicated students. 700 of those are the ones that are really have no program. So you can see the majority, just eyeballing it, about 8,000 of those 10,000 had some kind of program enrollment. By unduplicated, the fact that we were determined that they were unduplicated students, obviously we're unduplicating by program. So the fact that we were able to determine that those 8,043 were unduplicated means there's 100% chance they have program enrollment. If they do not have any program enrollment, obviously there's no way on earth we have any way of knowing whether they're duplicated or unduplicated. So I just said a really manipulative mouthful with that. Does everybody follow me on that, yes or no? Okay, so we're comparing the no designated program to those who are unduplicated. That's just the kind of overcomplicated way to say we've got all our students in this column, how many have program enrollment, how many don't. So we're looking at that, those 10,000 and some, or we're looking at the 8,000 unduplicated. So we're looking at the 8,000 and subtracting those 700, and then we're going back and dividing it against that 8043. That gives us about 91%. That, by the way, is a really good percentage. It's not way above average, but it does suggest we're doing pretty well. That in sum, that means of those that have any kind of AP activity at all, 91% are at least getting some kind of program enrollment. If that's how we're looking at our agency or at our consortium, that's overall a pretty good job. So does everybody follow how you can find out this information at the agency level using that AP summary? Okay, and what I'll just say is if you look at this and you don't think it's that good, what you can do, if you feel like, hey, 91% is good, but we should be doing a lot better than that, to fix it, you're going to look at the no designated program item count, because that obviously represents the subset of these students who are part of the 9% who are not part of that positive ratio. So what you would want to do is right-click on the 700. You can select the in-program years. Again, that's the way you can be sure to get some information about them. Again, there isn't going to be much of a way to fix it on the spot because you need to enroll them in a program, but right-click program years, and that will at least identify which of those students they are, and then you can add a program to as many are applicable. I'll point out you probably will not be able to add a program to all of them because some of them, of course, will just not be around long enough to have a program, but you can at least verify the 700 and see if maybe some of them might be logical for adding a program in that enrollment. Because that would be how you would fix it, quote unquote, if you look at this number and determine that it's not a very good number. Okay, so the next metric introduced by the AEP office, I'm calling it AEP Program Persistence to be clear. That's just my title for it. But here again is where we're comparing the enrollees in that middle section from column E to that right-hand services section in column L. Again, what we're saying is of those who get at least 1 hour of instruction and get some kind of program enrollment, what percentage of those are getting at least 12 hours of instruction and thereby qualifying for AP outcomes? Cutting to the chase, that means they're qualifying for column E, where we're looking at those students eligible for outcomes. So again, we're lining up column E and column L. That's the first step. And then just like we did in the previous example, to make it an apples-to-apples comparison, when we're looking at column L, we need to weed out the no designated program because we're not saying what percentage of everybody is getting the 12 hours. We're saying what percentage of those who qualified for AP with at least 1 hour of instruction. So given that's what the metric the AP office has defined, that means we need to weed out those with no designated program. So what we're doing is we're looking at that unduplicated count in column E. That's the 5119, and then we're dividing it by that number we generated in the previous example. That is the 8,000 and some minus 700. When we do the actual math, that's just under 70%. So you might say we're right at about average with this percentage. About 70% of our students who qualify for one of those 7 AP programs are sticking around long enough to get at least 12 hours of instruction. I'll just say as an aside, that's not really good. That's not really bad. In this example, we're right about average. So I'm going to pause again. That's example 5. Does everybody follow how we got the math here for example number 5? Is that making sense? Yes or no? I know I'm yapping. I must be driving everybody crazy. Hopefully some of this yapping is resonating some. Okay, it's becoming clear. So there's a big bowl of murky pea soup. Maybe little by little it's dissipating. So you're just saying you need to hear this a few times before any of that pea soup clears away. Is that the comment I'm hearing? Okay, I see you're typing. Sorry, okay, thank you. I don't mean to pick on you, Linda, but I'm singling you out because I'm sensing a little bit of honesty in your answer, so I like to grab hold of those honest answers like that. Pick on me, it's okay. Bring it on, thank you. Okay, so going back to example 5, so we showed you how to make that calculation in the report to make sure you calculate the math correctly. So the next part of this is if you calculate it and the result is a number that you see as less than satisfying, what you can do is, well, first off, compare columns E and L. We said that already. Look for areas where the numbers might be different. So again, we're looking at those who have at least 1 hour, what percentage are sticking around to get at least 12 hours. So you can see we have those enrollment counts across the 7 AP programs. So by looking at the AP summary, we can compare by program. So the benefit here is we can start to make an attempt to isolate some of this and try to figure out if there's patterns by program. Sometimes there will be, sometimes there won't. In this example, I'm kind of making my own judgment here, but by my reckoning, I'm going to say in these programs, you know, there's some like ABE that kind of look fine. There's some like Reentry that look fine. But I'll say HSE, HSD are the two that look a little suspect. CTE, maybe priority number 2. But I'm prioritizing the second bullet by looking at where is there the biggest difference between the number of enrollees in column E versus the number of enrollees in column L. By my reckoning, the areas that have the biggest difference are going to be the areas that I'm going to say require the most work. So I won't say it's that clear cut because you might go by sheer numbers in this case, but for my 2 cents, HSE, HSD represents the top priority for this agency. I'm arguing that in this example because those are the programs where I'm saying the biggest difference, that is, those are the areas where we're getting a lot of people showing up under services, but we're getting a much smaller percentage of those who show up in column L also show up under column E. So yes, again, yet again, you know, okay, I'll just say you can send that as an you can send that as an email request, and I'll forward along if you want. I'm not sure I'll remember just from this, but Lorena, Francisco, if you want to send me an email, by all means, send it to me, and I'll forward it along if that's what you're looking for. Maria, your question, there's no real official acceptable or unacceptable, but I'll say about 70% for these persistence rates. That's been our state-level persistence rate for a while, so my oversimplified answer is about 70%. I know there were some presentations Neil did with more AP-specific examples with, I think, a little better numbers than 70. But off the top of my head, I'll say if you're 70 or better, you're probably okay. If you're under 70, then you probably have a problem. So anyway, if you need to fix this, sorry, I'm talking about too many things at once. But again, we're going to say diploma and HSC are the areas where this agency needs to improve. So that's what I'm selecting. I'm right-clicking to NRS Monitor, because I can tell that's where we have a problem, but I'm not sure what the problem is. And then I'm going to select DIR, so these are just different examples. We can right-click and look at the NRS Monitor, get some specific students, and figure out whether there's specific students that look problematic. We could also right-click to the DIR. In this case, we can look more specifically at item number 2, verify whether hours of instruction is an issue, and then we can also just simply select student and program years, you know, just line up the listers together and try to figure out some names that show up in one and not the other. That doesn't sound very pleasant at all. Yes, that is a lot of kind of cumbersome legwork, but it is kind of a good last resort. Usually if you just line them up, if you can kind of compare and identify which names show up in one but not the other, over time, once you start generating that list of names, you know, generally speaking, you know, once you get a few names, it does start to resonate. Well, gee, these names are all students in high school diploma. Gee, these names are all students that are from this particular site or in this particular class, whatever. A lot of times when you get names that are the odd ones out, you start seeing a pattern if you do it that way. Again, that's last resort. Again, state average about 70%. Okay, so let's move on here. We'll go to example number 6. So this one I'm calling the AEP Program Outcomes Metric. So again, my title, not anybody but my own title, but that's what I'm calling it. So that's taking it the next step. So we looked and said of everybody on the report, how many qualify for AP overall with at least 1 hour. Second step is of those who qualify for at least 1 hour, how many qualify for outcomes and have 12 or more hours. Then the next metric is of those who have 12 or more hours, how many managed to achieve at least one AEP outcome. So in this case, we're focusing on the middle section, in particular column E. That is the column that gives you the total number of enrollees for that middle outcome section. So what we're going to do is, again, focus on that middle section of the report. What we're going to do is we're just going to take column F through column K, and we're going to look at those 6 areas of AB 104, and we're simply adding up those 6 columns. We're looking at the total unduplicated students at the bottom. In this case, it's 240 plus 0 plus 1 plus 24 plus 3 plus 114. That's our total number of outcomes. We're just taking the sum of those 6 categories and adding up. That gives us our total number of outcomes, and then we're dividing it up against that 1408 that represents the unduplicated total for column E. In this example, we show 27%. As an example, in this area, this agency not doing very well, they would really want to look at how they might improve. What I'll also say with this is some of you have come back to me with the question, gee, I got something higher than 100%. What am I doing wrong? My answer there is probably nothing. I'll just say it is entirely possible if you're a really high-performing agency and or really high-performing consortium that this is a percentage that could be more than 100%. If you're more than 100%, then that means you've got more outcomes overall at your agency or consortium than you do number of students. If that's the case, that's for the most part just a really, really good thing. For the most part, that means you're just doing a really, really good job. But again, most of you are under 100%. That said, most of you are going to be way better than this 27% if that's the case. Yes, I know, we're good to go. Good thing we split it up there. Liberty. Okay, so moving along here. So for troubleshooting, if you're like this agency and you look pretty low, again, you can look at the number of outcomes. So in this case, just in a vacuum, we're looking good in terms of transition outcomes. We're looking good in terms of those literacy gains. So just looking at that, we've got big numbers in those 2 areas. The other 4 areas are not so good. So employment, wages, secondary, post-secondary, that's where we got low numbers. That's where we might want to focus. Again, that's something you would know, but just in a vacuum, we want to look at those numbers that are really low, especially that HSD, HSE. If we have zeros there, that's kind of bad news. And then we can just right-click those cells that are areas of concern. Maybe it's the total number of unduplicated learners. If we're focusing on high school diploma, it may well behoove us to focus on the total who are enrolled in high school diploma. You might say the fact that we've got 0 in workforce reentry who earn their diploma, the fact that we have 0 students in career tech ed that earn their diploma. In a vacuum, I would say that's a very, very small problem because we're not really looking for career tech ed students to earn their diploma. But the fact that we have 167 high school diploma learners and area 1 has earned their diploma, that's obviously a very big problem. So just use common sense guidelines like that to get yourself started. Obviously, we'd be expecting some of our high school diploma students to actually earn their high school diploma. In any case, we can right-click and select the Outcomes Monitor. That's a good way to get into those specific outcomes to shed more light on why we might have good numbers or bad numbers. And then the other thing we can do is back to what we showed in example 2 and 3, where we can right-click and look at DIR items 23 to 27. In this case, we might be looking at item 24A and B. That is where we're looking at things like high school equivalency and high school diploma. Right, so it can be more than 100% because you can have a student that earns their diploma and also got a job. If that's the case, you're marking 2 outcomes for that student, not just 1. So thereby you've got more outcomes than you have students. So if all your students look like that, then you might get over 100% ROML. So in any case, is everybody following this example number 6? Again, I'm talking about a bunch of things at once again, so making sure, are we good here? You're all saying you do, so thank you for humoring me there. So we'll move on to example 7 and 8 because we're heading toward 1:30 here. I gave Liberty and Veronica bad feedback that I would finish early. Obviously, I got long-winded for the umpteenth time. In any case, examples 7 and 8, here's where we're dealing more specifically with pre- and post-testing. So obviously, we're dealing with pre- and post-testing, so we're focusing more specifically on the left-hand section with literacy gains that focuses on, well, pre- and post-testing. So here, to Annabelle's question from the beginning of the training, here's where probably we're really just wanting to look at ESL, ABE, and ASE. To Annabelle's point earlier, if you happen to be testing everybody in Career Tech Ed, well, then obviously you'd want to look at that too. But this example presumes that all your testing is in those WIOA 2 programs, because those, of course, are the only programs in which you're required to do pre- and post-testing. So in this example, we're looking at ESL and ABE, and you can see the number of gains we have there in column D is pretty low as compared to the number of enrollees. So you can see we've got the total number of enrollees with pre-post tests in column B. Column C shows the first subset, that is, of those who qualified for that program, how many of those actually stuck around long enough to get a pre-test and a post-test. Then in column D, of those that have a pre-post pair, how many actually made a level gain. So that's what we're looking at in example 7 and 8. So again, regardless, we're basically comparing column B, C, and D. If the number in B and C are far apart, like in the example above, that is, of everybody who qualifies, we're saying a small portion actually had a pre- and post-test. That is, we're looking at this and concluding that our persistence rate is low. That is, of those who qualify, we're not getting a very good percentage get a pre-post pair. Then we're really looking at data cleanup issues and getting all our students tested. That is, our persistence is low. We can look at these percentages and we can compare it and see that that's low. To a lot of your questions, that rule of thumb is 70%. That's more of a firm answer. We've been right around 70% statewide for 5 or more years. When we're looking at testing, 70% is definitely the magic number. So you want to be 70% or better here. So in this case, we're way under 70%. So in this example, if we know our numbers are low, we need to just focus on data cleanup issues and getting our students tested. And so here's where we can follow up on that. So here, again, if we're trying to figure out who, again, the same sort of feedback, we can look at the NRS monitor. That will show students who are missing hours, missing demographics. We can look in detail at test performance. If we're in an issue where we're missing pre-post pairs, we're simply looking at the list of students and finding which students are blank in the pre-post section. If we've got poor numbers in terms of level gain, but we're doing a good job getting students tested, that is, our performance is low, but our persistence is high for whatever reason, then, we need to look and find out those students who have the pre-post but have 0 or minimal gains. That's the mechanical way that we can follow up on this. Okay, we can also right-click and go to DIR item 8, 9, and 10. Those are the items on the DIR that focus on pre- and post-testing. Item 8 is showing us those that have no tests. Item 9 is showing those that have a pre-test but no post-test. Item 10 is showing those students that do have a pre and do have a post, but that somehow did not make a level gain. So based on which combination of data points yields which problem, again, all 3 of those items most likely won't help, but one of these 3 items most likely will. If you've got a lot of pairs but a low number of level gains, then obviously you might want to right-click and check on item 10. If you know that your issue is just you don't have that many pre-post pairs, look at item 8 and 9 and identify those students that either have a pre but no post, or who potentially might have no test whatsoever. Either way, they're going to show up in the same bucket of not having a pre-post test pair, so that's where you can kind of make that distinction. Okay, so I'll just say, everybody clear on these pre-post test examples? Everybody clear on that? Any questions? We're at 127. Okay, everybody's saying yes. Thank you for being so cooperative. So I'll just rattle off what we'll talk about here next time without getting into it. But again, on Wednesday, we'll get into consortium level examples. Obviously, at the consortium level, we cannot drill down. So this will focus less on drill down and more on, things like Excel and creating other documents and just general calculations. So we'll look at some Excel-specific examples. Then we'll, of course, look at those same issues related to performance and persistence. That's where the training will be exactly the same as this one. We'll look at it from a consortium manager point of view rather than an agency manager point of view, and look at ways where you can evaluate it by looking at Excel, whereas in this example we looked at ways evaluating it by the AP summary, AP DIR, and doing drill down. And so what I'll just say is, there's many. So this is primarily just looking at state level requirements here. This is an AP TAP webinar, so we tried to really focus on state level requirements. We did ignore the federal requirements on purpose here because it's AP TAP, but again, obviously there's other chances for federal reporting. What I'll say though is this should just whet your appetite here. We will be doing some regional trainings here in April and May, where we'll be doing these same issues. We'll be doing them in the lab, where we'll hopefully get into these examples with a little more detail and, reinforce this a little bit better when we're in a lab in TE. It goes without saying, when we get to this ridiculously obnoxious level of detail, having me just babble on ad nauseum in a webinar is only going to go so far, but hopefully it at least gives you understanding on the sort of issues the state is wanting you to review, and at least giving you the basic level information of where to get started and where to start doing the right clicking and drilling down in your data, because a lot of you have said, gee, we don't even know where to get started with this. So what this should do is at least give you guidance on where to get started. So with that, it's exactly 1:30, so I'm going to turn this over to Liberty and Veronica now.
Thank you, Jay. I want to thank you and our audience for participating in today's webinar. Part 2 of this Data Dive series is this Wednesday at 12 o'clock, and a link to register can be found in the chat box. Also, just to remind you, the recording of this webinar will be available online on the CalAdult website. It may take us a few days to get it up there, though, because we will have to do a few little edits. But after the webinar ends, there will be an evaluation link that's going to open on your screen, and we really want to encourage you to complete the evaluation. It supports our efforts of continuous improvement. And I want to remind you that if there is a need for technical assistance or professional development, please contact TAP. A link to submit a support request is in the chat box. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.